Good morning. Ooh. Okay. What's our lesson about this week? Work. It is about work. Well, what about work? I actually want to start off, because we're having a reduced Sabbath school time this morning. We've got to pack it in a little bit tighter, but I want to start off with a small quote from Friday's lesson. But before we do that, let's start with prayer, shall we? Lord, most holy Father in heaven, we just ask that you would send your Spirit to inhabit our thoughts, our minds, that you would take our imagination into your word, that we would grasp a bigger picture of life and how to be more productive for you in your vineyard. In Jesus' name, amen. So the quote is from Patriarchs and Prophets. It says, "The life of toil and care, which was henceforth to be man's lot, was appointed in love. It was a discipline rendered needful by his sins, to place a check on the indulgence of appetite and passion, to develop habits of self-control. It was a part of God's great plan for man's recovery from the ruin and degradation of sin." If you read, I believe it is in Patriarchs and Prophets, in the beginning, sustenance was not difficult at all to maintain. Your daily bread and water was very, very easy to attain. So the concept of survival doesn't even work in that context, because it's not survival as we think of it. But it was easy to live, right? So before the fall, what did Adam and Eve do with their time? Spirit of prophecy says they what was the word? They were active. I can't remember. Gainfully employed is not the right word, but they spent their time dressing the garden. They were working, but it was a pleasant,
a joyful work.
It was a joyful work. Really, probably wasn't work as we would think of as work. But after the fall, what happened?
It was a burden.
It was still fairly easy in those early days to get yourself fed, but they had an abundance of time. They didn't necessarily want to be gainfully employed, and so they had a lot of leisure. And I believe the terms that were used were dissipation and revelry that mankind got themselves into, and it became quite a licentious world.
My question is how long did it take how long did it take the thorns and the briars to pop up?
Yeah, I don't know.
Was it overnight, or did it take time?
It probably took a little time, but we just don't have any data. Yeah. We don't know. So let's look at this idea of work and Christian values. As I was going through this lesson, thinking about work, there was a couple of things that came to my mind about work. Let me ask you this. I'll start you with this. Somewhere in here. You probably can't see this from here, but I brought a nail with me. And if you probably can't see, but it's a square nail. How many of you are old enough to have used square nails? Really?
Yep, I used for the shop. My dad was a carpenter.
Uh-huh.
And he had a shop, and we've gone back to those, and we used the square nails for the horses.
Really?
Sharpened differently at the end.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the horse thing is kind of cheating because we still use the square nails for the horseshoeing today. But as far as a standard hardware item, some of you remember using square nails.
Do they stay in better?
Okay, so that was the question is, okay, so for those of you who have used square nails, what's the advantage of a square nail over a round nail?
They have more surface.
Okay.
They will hold on to. I mean, instead of round. You don't bend as easy.
They don't bend as easy, okay? The mechanics of how a square nail was made makes it stronger. And you're right, it's got more surface area, and the whole concept of a nail is friction being held in, right? Another thing about square nails is the lack of a point. How many of you know how to effectively take a round nail, drive it within a half inch of the end of a board and not have it split the end of the board out? You have to dull it. So you turn the round nails are really good at splitting wood, right? So you turn it upside down and you flatten the tip. Well, with the square nail,
It's already flat.
So there's a lot less splitting with it. I mean, people were smart back then. So why don't we have them today? The manufacturing of a square nail is a lot more difficult. Round nails, they make out of these gigantic rolls of wire. And the wire can just like speed through the machine and just gets diced up and the head made, and it's just real easy. So convenience, and it's cheaper. Square nails have to be made out of a flat bar that is cut like that. Anyway, so when I think about work, I think about the older days. And speaking of that, some homework for this week is go home and look up on YouTube, type in grandfather full documentary. It's a very fascinating video, quite wholesome, of a grandfatherly guy, and it just goes through his life and some of the old tools that he used. It's just very pleasant. And it was all about work. But when work was, I think, productive of more than just labor, it produced a character. Yeah.
Work can be a means of creativity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can build and create things by work. It's kind of a similarity to the creation of the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we're mostly grown up here. You notice the quote that I read, why in a sinful world God appointed our labor. He chose that feeding and housing ourselves was more difficult. Why did it say in this quote?
I want to say that first.
Yeah.
Work is not bad.
We'll get there.
Okay.
You're getting ahead of
I want to say that the thorns
Yes.
that were grown, I read this week that it's connected to the thorn that Christ wear to take our thorns away
Yeah.
in his crown. And I was surprised because I never thought of that. So
Yeah.
anyway, I just came when I heard the word thorn and the speakers outside.
Yeah. So work was designed after the fall, our patriarchs and prophets, quote, said, because it would, how did it say? Keep us busy and what? What were the two things it was putting a check on?
Controlling my thoughts. Because we now have an evil nature.
Right.
A thought pattern is different than what it is. And work focuses on creativity. It teaches out the
So the idea of character. Too much time. You notice the reference in the Patriarchs and Prophets. Too much time in the kitchen or the bedroom. The appetites and the passions creates an ill-formed character. So God gainfully employed us. We had to start plowing the field. The work we did. Now, what does it take for us to survive? A full day's labor. And that's a good thing. But let's go on. On Sunday's lesson, we want to turn to Genesis 3:19 is our first reference there. In Genesis 3:19. In the context here, what does this say to us about the other side of work? So the question, what is this telling us about work? So Genesis 3:19, Jeannie.
In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return.
Okay, so what is that verse telling us? The specific words there were, in the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread. What is the Lord conveying in that sentiment? It's going to take work. It's going to take effort. So, is God saying that work should be a drudgery?
No.
Why not? Because, so we want to kind of tease this out. Because work can be mundane, and it can be a drudgery, and it can be exhausting. In the end, we work our whole lives through just enough to scrape enough together to retire, and then 2 years after we retire, we just die. I mean, that's the bleak setting, right? How many of you are all looking forward to that? But we see that in the world today, don't we? I mean, man, you just spend your whole life scraping stuff together, and so
it's not so much the end as it is the journey along the way. What is our attitude in work?
So when we choose a field of work, how should we choose that field of work?
Something we love to do. Something the Lord has blessed us with to help others. It's, whether it's a mechanic or it's a dishwasher or a cook or a mother or, there's so many things, and it's like, what is our attitude in our work? Do we enjoy it?
Can you enjoy and have a fulfilling life being a doctor?
Yes.
Okay, y'all are not doctors. What do you say, David? Okay, good. How about being, who else is professional here? A pastor. Okay, I'm going to make the big jump here since we're running out of time. How many people can have, what was my criteria? A fulfilling life as a plumber.
Yes.
How about a gas station attendant? How about making burritos at Taco Bell for minimum wage?
Yeah.
If you're a people person.
Yeah.
Okay. So what am I getting at?
I think any occupation we have, I was a barber for 20 years.
Yeah.
Is a matter of service.
Mm-hmm.
Is people the service. Anything you do, whether it's tacos or barber or doctor, it is a field of service. When you have that frame of mind, there is fulfillment because you're giving and not expecting anything in return.
So what we're getting at is how you approach your work. Work can be mundane. It can be a pain. One of my first jobs out of college was I was working in a manufacturing plant that built trusses for houses. And I remember fresh out of college, it was dark when I was going to work in the morning, and it was dark when I was coming home from work in the evening. And that gives you time to think, what am I doing? Is this really what's going to happen until I'm 62, 65, or whenever? And I started thinking there's got to be more purpose to life than going to work in the dark, coming home in the dark, and just waiting for the 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, to just... So yeah, how do we look at work? How do we approach work so that even if it is what we consider mundane, we put joy into it? Sunday's lesson also brings up a text found in Ecclesiastes. Actually, sorry, Dennis, you don't necessarily need to put, well, yes, do this if you could. Ecclesiastes 2:24, if you could slip that one up on the board. Ecclesiastes 2:24.
Jimmy, read it?
Yes, if you could read that.
Okay. 2:24. There is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God.
Okay, so what are the elements of this verse? Now, the fact that we're in Ecclesiastes, what do you know about the book of Ecclesiastes? Who wrote it, number one?
Solomon.
Solomon wrote it. Why did he write it?
It was all vanity. All that he had been striving for in his wisdom, he was looking for purpose. He was looking for, what does this life mean? Yeah. The whole book of Ecclesiastes was written as a commentary on what's the meaning, what's the purpose of life. And so Solomon says, he gives this huge list of all the things that he set out to do, but he keeps coming back to this thought right here. This is vanity, that's vanity, this was pointless. But he comes back, there's nothing better than what should we do? You should make it eat.
Does he say eat, drink, and be drunken?
No.
No. What is he conveying when he says that we should eat and drink?
It's stuff that we do every day. We should do it with purpose.
Do it with purpose, right? And what's the next sentiment? And
he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor.
What does that mean? To enjoy the good of your labor?
To appreciate what you have.
If you don't like what you're doing,
do something else.
How many of you have had jobs you don't like doing? Anybody? Okay, what was the job? I work for the IRS. Ooh.
Good point.
Can you move over?
No. We love you. Stay.
Why didn't you like that? We have friends that work for the IRS now.
Yeah.
No, he's retired. Well, okay, why didn't you like that job? Okay.
But there were issues, is what you're saying.
Okay. Anybody else? A job you didn't like? Dennis.
I worked for a couple of years at Salt Lake.
Uh-huh.
And after a couple of years, I decided this is not what I want to do the rest of my life.
Do you want to restate that?
Okay, so Dennis worked in a sawmill, and after a few years he realized this is not what he wanted to do for his life.
There was no challenge. I kept the same board over and over.
The millionth 2x4 looks just like the first one you cut.
Yeah.
The monotony of work. So the reference on Sunday's lesson, very top of the page, is I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is a gift of God. So it was God that told Adam and Eve and humanity that by the sweat of your brow, you were going to survive. For your own good. Life was going to be hard. So that in order to live, if you had the intention, that you would be gainfully employed in your sustenance, that your free time would be minimized to save yourself from
yourself.
From yourself. Yes, exactly. Ecclesiastes goes on and repeats the sentiment. You don't have to put this on the board, but Jeannie, if you'd turn a page over to Ecclesiastes 5:18.
Okay. 5:18 says, "Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor, that he taketh under the sun, all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion."
And then flip over to chapter 9, verse 7 to 9.
"Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Let thy garments be always white, and let thy head lack no ointment. Live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of the life of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun, all the days of thy vanity, for that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun."
So Solomon keeps coming back to this sentiment. He's exploring through the whole book the inequity, the vanity, the pointlessness of life, but he keeps coming back to this sentiment. What is it that he's really trying to convey for us?
A heart of gladness, a heart of thankfulness for
Okay.
what we have.
Gladness, thankfulness,
Contentment,
optimism, or pessimism?
optimism. He was pessimism.
Do y'all believe what she's saying? So y'all are real quiet right now.
We talking too much?
Yeah. Okay, ministry. What about ministry?
Ministering to people. And you can do that in anything you do.
Yes. David.
I have often felt honest, and I put that in parentheses.
Yeah.
An honest Christian automobile mechanic has a potential of being one of the best ministers in the community.
Yes. And
Yeah.
a plumber too.
What?
Honest.
Because that's hard to find sometimes.
Yep. Honest mechanic.
It's kind of proverbial, at least that I've seen. When a woman drives a car into a mechanic shop, they see her coming a mile away. Now, when I say that, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Ooh, we've got a customer. You need this fixed, and this fixed, and this fixed, and this fixed. You know what I'm saying? So honesty, does that apply to any other field?
Yeah.
Every one of them. Yeah.
Sometimes when you're working and have ministry, there's difficult times and you don't really enjoy it. I remember the LE, I was in front of a house at 9 o'clock at night, my last door wasn't up, and raining like cats and dogs. She opened the door and I started to make my presentation. She held a 38 revolver right in my head. It wasn't very enjoyable right there.
Praise God.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay. So,
So in every job or means of employments, we find that, yeah, there are down days. But how do we respond to those down days?
yeah.
Recognize that we're not here to make money. We're here to be a representative for Christ to the world.
Amen.
So sometimes we work in jobs that we interact with people. Other jobs we don't. Many a day that I'm at farmer's market, meet all kinds of people. A lot of people you just see it on their face that you can play with them and kind of mess with them a little bit just by their demeanor. Other people actually walk into my booth backward. They'll walk through and they'll look at the plants like this. What is that telling me?
They're not open.
Just let them do their thing. But if they buy something, they have to face me. And there's always opportunities, and no matter what we do, to, even if somebody's having a down day, recognize why is it that they don't want to talk to anybody. They're all closed up.
When you said you like to play with them, when you talk about play, you're talking about connecting.
Connecting.
And having a connection where you can share more than maybe just plants.
So Jeannie's worried about how y'all are thinking what I'm like. By playing with people, yeah, get them involved and get the conversation going and smiling.
Yeah.
So that when they leave, they're happy. Yeah.
There's an art and science to communication that everyone must understand in order to make their life work a success, even
Yeah.
in Christian experience. So the communication skills we have, you find a person that's negative and is not too friendly, practicing these simple little secrets.
Mm-hmm.
You can draw them out and open them up, and that's the mirror. You find a way to their heart by asking
Yeah.
Yeah.
And life becomes, when you approach life like that, life becomes almost like a laboratory. Every day becomes an experiment.
Or an adventure.
Or an adventure. So I'm sitting in my little booth at the fairgrounds down here at Farmers Market, and I see somebody walking by. They don't look like they're having a bad day, the way they're walking, their body language, but they're not interested in plants necessarily. But as they're out there walking by, they glance my way, and I'm like, come over here. And then they smile, and they come over. And they'll come over, and they'll look at something, and I'll say, oh, don't touch that. So, and then they realize, oh, yeah? And it becomes a game, it becomes dialogue, and then they just want to talk. So what about this? What about that? And I'm like, oh, yeah, you want to see something really cool? Look at this.
When you start talking to them, they start opening up.
Yeah.
It's a sign that they begin to trust you.
Mm-hmm.
They've got to trust you to open up their hearts to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go to some people and say, I'm kind of shy. Can I talk to you?
Yeah, right. So let's go on Monday's lesson. What do the following texts teach us about work? Using our hand. These verses use hands as a symbol, but turn to Deuteronomy 16:15. Deuteronomy 16:15.
7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase, and in all the works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice.
Okay, what can we learn from this reference? So God's telling his people, 7 days you shall keep a solemn feast. I scratch my head. That sounds like an oxymoron. What is a feast? Is it being gluttonous? Are those two is feasting and gluttony synonymous? You shook your head no. Why? Okay. You don't have to be a glutton to be feasting, right?
No. You can have a Thanksgiving feast, and it all depends on how you eat it. You can enjoy it as a feast. A feast is kind of like a joyful get-together. It's a time for connection with food and people.
So what is a solemn feast? I mean, help me understand this so I can walk away and actually accomplish this. Help me understand. Okay, spiritual what? Solemn feast.
Or a thoughtful. Thoughtful, you're putting thought into...
Putting thought into what you're doing.
Right.
Does that mean we're all sitting around the table eating and nobody's talking? Okay, no? Good.
Well, it says a solemn feast unto the Lord, so this doesn't necessarily talk about food. It could be, it says, 7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast unto the Lord, thy God, in the place which the Lord shall choose. So it could be a feast of glorifying God, worshiping God.
Notice the next word. Because what?
Because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase.
And
in all the works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice.
oh, so it's, in the end, it's rejoicing.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get this idea that rejoicing and solemnity are two different things. Can we solemnly rejoice? Solemnly rejoice. Of course we
Yes.
can. It's true-hearted joy that isn't frivolous joy, giddy, happy, goofy joy, but it's heartfelt, it's deep, it's got life in it.
A feast of knowledge.
Okay? A feast of knowledge based on... How did we start... what was the beginnings of Thanksgivings in this country? Wasn't it kind of just that? If you look back at the old writings from a century or so ago, the whole concept of the Thanksgiving was a solemn rejoicing that God provided for us, and we survived and made it. With the help of the native people that pitied us, we made it. Yeah.
The Jews came together 3 times a year to have solemn feasts of Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So it wasn't, these solemn feasts weren't for merriment and entertainment. I think that's really what we're getting at in this. But it was purposeful and it was meaningful. If we go on, Ecclesiastes 9:10.
Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest.
Okay, what is the Lord telling us about work here?
That we are to do our work to the best of our ability.
Okay.
Do it with thy might,
So, yes, Dennis.
energy.
Work doesn't stop when we retire. But it does when you die. That's what this text is saying, right?
Do it while you're
Okay,
alive.
so having said that, perfect. How many of you have got more projects going right now than you have life left to finish? So what's the advice? This one jumped out at me on the page when I was reading this week. What is this reference telling me?
We have to prioritize. You have to pick the best and over the good, over the, you've got to prioritize what's most important and do that with all your energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good planning.
He who fails his plan,
You better plan.
Plans to fail.
That's right.
another thing I can tell the uneasy, you work hard, it's easy.
Yes. So, so as I read this text, it seems like it's saying you can't tie up loose ends when you die. whatever you do, do it thoroughly. Do it with all your heart. Don't do a halfway job. Don't spend your life in idleness doing what you're absolutely certain that you can finish, and you can finish well. That didn't come out right. Okay, so as a teacher, I used to teach chemistry and physics. There were some students that would always, 100% of the time, get 90% or above on all their assignments and tests. What did that tell me about their education?
It was important to them.
It was what?
Important to them.
It was important to them, but it also told me I was not plumbing the depths of their ability. Because when you always get, like, boom, always a very, very good grade, that means I am not pushing you, challenging you enough that, and a good teacher will recognize that and will push them a little bit harder and start bringing those grades down just a little bit. That's when I knew I'm not going to drop it down to a C, but I'm going to push them enough so that I know where the frontier of their knowledge and challenge really is. So you just a little bit more. You grade them with a little bit stiffer brush, and it starts coming down, and then they're like, whoa. It's like, now we're at a point where you're really sharpening the sword that you got up there. So this idea that Ecclesiastes is trying to get through to us, put your heart and soul into everything that you do. Let's go on quickly. Proverbs 21:25.
The desire of the slothful killeth him, for his hands refuse to labor.
Okay, that's kind of old English. What does that mean for us today? The desire of the sloth.
Lazy.
The desire of the lazy man kills him. Why?
Because his hands refuse to labor. He's not doing anything to better himself or to feed himself.
So how would we say that in today's English?
You better steal or cheat.
Okay, steal it. Get it the easy way. Just play lottery until I win.
Or have somebody else feed him.
Okay, the idea of, there's a word for that, entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a program out there that I can sign up for that I will get free this, free that.
Or the woman that we knew who refused to marry her boyfriend. They had 5 boys. She wanted a girl, so she kept having kids till she got a girl, like 7. It's like living on welfare, and that's not what welfare was for.
Can we put this verse this way? Laziness will kill your hopes.
Kill your hopes? Hope? Okay.
Can you have hopes and dreams and aspirations as a lazy person? Yes, you can.
You can't.
Okay, but what? They will never come to
Fruition.
fruition. And I think it is Ecclesiastes or Proverbs that says hope deferred does what? Do you remember that? Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Yeah. Gives you depression. Gives you a...
And there's a lot of that.
Why try? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't want that.
We need to hope.
How about Jeremiah 1:16?
Jeremiah.
It says, "And I will utter my judgments against them touching all their wickedness, who have forsaken me, and have burned incense unto other gods, and worshipped the works of their own hands."
Oh, okay, so this brings up a different aspect of the idea of labor and work and what you're doing. The worship of the product of your own hands. You're biting at the bit. What do you have to say?
Your work becomes your God.
Yes. How many of you have seen people who have gotten into that position where work becomes this all-consuming thing that they have like sucked their identity into?
Is that like a workaholic?
Yes. Not workaholic because I just like to work. It's workaholic because somewhere deep inside I'm compelled. I can't. I've got to finish this. I've got to finish it. Now, do you see it in my face, in what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There's a story about that. Who was the famous composer that worked himself to death? Was it Beethoven? Just compelled to finish and then just do one more. And what happened in the end?
He died early.
Yeah, worked himself to death at an early age for absolutely no reason other than internal compulsion.
Is that our internal brokenness?
Yes. It's self-medication, yeah.
I think it's some form of self-righteousness. Look what I'm doing.
And that's the idolatry part here. Yeah.
Is that pride?
Wow, look what I've done, everybody. Look at this.
But
No.
And what we as a society have lost because of the early death. What could they have accomplished if they had have been more balanced in their work?
So there's a balance between enjoying what you do, doing it with creativity, intelligence, and finesse. And as God said in Genesis 2, and behold, it was very good. And essentially, didn't God create the Sabbath as a day of rest to find the beauty and joy of creation? So that's on one side. The other side is what this verse is talking about, is when it becomes the God that you worship. And you get imbalanced that way. So that's not a good thing when our work compels us in life. Let's move on. Where are we? Tuesday. Exodus 25, and I want to reduce the reading of Exodus 25 down to Exodus 25, 17 to 22. So we're going to just take a little snippet out of there.
Okay.
So the question that is brought up, how particular was God when he asked Moses to create the tabernacle of worship? What does this tell us about God's character and the idea of work?
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
And thou shalt make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And thou shalt make 2 cherubims of gold, of beaten work, which thou make them in the 2 ends of the mercy seat. And make 1 cherub at the one end, and the other cherub on the other end. Even of the mercy seat shall you make the cherubims on the 2 ends thereof. And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above upon the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I shall meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I will give thee in commandments unto the children of Israel.
Too bad we didn't have a picture. So can you explain what it would look like? The cherubims are angels.
Yes.
And the mercy seat was the ark of the testimony which held the 10 commandments. Correct? Right. The mercy seat was the top.
The top portion.
Yeah.
On top of the box. So these angels, and if you look in, it's either Isaiah or Ezekiel, depending on whether it was the cherubim or seraphim, with two wings they covered, and with two wings they covered themselves. They covered their faces, they covered their feet in the presence of God. Do you see the peculiarity in God's description here? It's very precise. You know, and as I was reading through this, Exodus 25, the very next segment, I believe, talks about the candlesticks. Think about this. The candlestick was to be made out of solid gold, out of one piece, beaten out of one piece of gold. Now, how big do you think the candlesticks were?
They were probably
3 feet?
pretty big.
4 feet.
There's a monument near Rome where
Okay.
Jesus was taking it back to Rome, and it was taller than that.
So, yeah, there was a picture of people carrying it, right? So, and it looked like about this big when it was captured. Okay, now think about this. 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches of gold.
Is that a cubit?
A cubic foot of gold weighs a smidgen over 1,200 pounds.
Wow.
So, potentially, how big around do you think the candlesticks were? I mean, it couldn't have been this little wiry thing, right? With flower-like, buds on the tops. This had to be substantial, right? Do you realize the potential? That could have weighed several hundred pounds. I never thought about that. But you start reading it, that was a lot of gold. I mean, I don't think, Marcus. It would be very heavy. Because gold is actually heavier than lead. We all know how heavy lead is. Well, the table of showbread here was actually wood overlaid with gold. The altar of incense was also wood overlaid with gold, right? The candlesticks were solid gold, and the Ark of the Covenant was it wood overlaid or was it solid? Okay, overlaid with gold. But the top part was all gold. God was very, very particular about how these things were built. And we can learn from that how particular should we be in everything that we do.
Yeah.
In our work. Yeah. In teaching chemistry and physics, it was very important to be particular, and oftentimes, I remember students would just write a numerical answer, but a numerical answer without units to tell me what those numerical values meant. It was wrong. And so the question, how many grams of this create how many grams of that? And they would put a number, 4.67. And then I would ask, 4.67 loaves of bread, cookies, oranges? What? That's an incomplete answer. And they got better. But the lesson is for us, let's be precise in our communication, in all that we do.
In our worship, too.
In our worship.
Can we go to Wednesdays?
Yes, let's go to Wednesday's lesson. Galatians 5:22-26.
But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. And they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another.
So what does this reference in Galatians have to do with work? So it's an interesting question there. Which gifts that Paul describes in this Galatians reference describes you and your work. So, let's put it a different way. We're all kind of, this is a public setting. How do people look at you and your work versus what do you like when you're at home behind closed doors? Go through this list. Anybody want to volunteer an answer? Because what's most important? Yes. Yeah.
And you should be just as loving to your spouse or your children as you are to your friends.
Yeah. Why is it that sometimes it's easier to be nicer to your friends than the people at home? Yeah, because you don't have to live with them. But wait a minute.
And sometimes the spouse and the children push your buttons.
They do. So, but come back to that thought. You don't have to live with them, so you can be nice to them. But wait a minute. They what?
They don't know all your faults.
So we're nicer to people on the outside that we don't live with because we want to make them think.
We want them to like us.
We want a good impression. We want them to like us. That's kind of like idolatry, isn't it? But when we go home, we're just, whatever. Blah, blah, blah. But wait a minute, we have to live with those people, right?
So we should be.
Wouldn't it make sense to put more effort into home than the person on the street?
If you put that kind of effort in a home, it will be automatically transferred to other people.
Yep.
Yeah. It would. I remember reading a statement, a well-ordered, well-disciplined family speaks more for the gospel than all the sermons in the world. So what's being conveyed there? If we live our faith, reduce our expectations down to reasonable levels so that I don't come into my home with expectations that I've been developing all day long about what's for supper and how the house looks and this and that and the other, and I'm bringing this expectation home, and she's been at work all day. What's going to happen? Yeah, I'm going to set her off, and then what she's going to do, because she's developing expectations of her own,
Probably
right?
react.
And because I got home first, she's going to think, oh, well, he'll put supper on and he'll put the laundry into the dryer, and
The house will be warm.
the house will be warm. And you get home and it's what? It's cold
Yeah.
and whatever, maybe. And what happens to the rest of our evening? It's cold. When's the last time that happened, by the way?
Probably this week.
The house
Some
was cold.
thoughts, yes, the house is cold.
But well, I guess what I'm saying
we have a wood
is,
stove.
I guess what I'm saying is, when's the last time we really snarled at each other, though?
Oh, it's been a long time.
I can't think.
Because
but
we're
putting
learning.
putting the effort in the home, I guess is what I'm saying is.
Yeah. Because we're on a journey. We're learning how to not have the expectation and to be loving to each other. You know, it reminds me of having the love of Christ in our lives and asking for me to have that love that Jesus has for me, for those around me.
Yeah.
And it's a daily walk and a daily challenge, because it's easy for the self to rise up and want to take charge, and that just doesn't help each other.
Our time is up, and I think there's people that want to use this room, so let's close with a word of prayer. Lord, most holy Father in heaven, Lord, as we go about life, as we choose the work that you would have us do, as we adventure out in life to find something to do, I just ask that you would touch our hearts, that you would speak to us, and give us a purpose and a meaning to life that we would put into everything, and be precise in what we do and in how we interact with people, so that we convey your Spirit to a tired world around us. That life wouldn't be a drudgery or a mundane, but we would find joy in the simple things that have to be done, and carry your Spirit with us. In Jesus' name, amen.